The storm raged outside, its howls echoing against the walls of the remote cabin nestled in the mountains. A blizzard, relentless and unforgiving, swirled through the trees like a living thing, casting a silver veil over the world. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The scent of pine and cedarwood mingled with the faint musk of old leather and aged wood, a comforting contrast to the chaos unfolding just beyond the door. Drake Lawson sat by the fire, his gaze fixed on the flames as they danced. He wasn't used to quiet like this, no hum of city life, no distant chatter or clatter of machinery. This was isolation, something he had craved for months. His muscles, still sore from the hike earlier, ached as he stretched his long legs in front of the fire. But there was something else, something gnawing at him. A sound. A shift. A faint sound that barely broke the silence. It was the scraping of metal on wood, too deliberate to be the wind. He was no stranger to danger, nor to the wilderness, but the hair on the back of his neck stood up as he turned toward the door. There, standing in the doorway, framed by the gusting snow and shadows, was a figure. She was tall, impossibly so, with an aura of strength that rippled through the storm like a beacon. Her long, dark hair whipped around her face, but even in the chaos of the storm, her features were sharp, defined, an alien grace in every line of her body. She wore a sleek, biotech suit that hummed with faint energy, its surface shifting like liquid metal, adapting to the storm's icy touch. For a moment, either of them moved. The world outside ceased to exist, leaving only the tension between them. His heart raced. His mind, trained to assess threats, scrambled to place her. She was alien. Her eyes, glowing faintly, were the color of shattered emeralds. There was something undeniably powerful about her presence, something that made Drake feel small despite his size and experience. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice steady but low, edged with the knowledge of imminent danger. He had come to these mountains seeking solitude, not to find his worst nightmare standing at his door. The cold winds outside bit at his skin, but it was nothing compared to the chill creeping up his spine. The woman's lips twitched in what might have been a smirk, if her features were capable of such softness. "No," she replied, her voice smooth, almost melodic, but carrying an authority that commanded the room. "But neither are you." Her gaze didn't waver as she stepped inside, brushing the snow from her shoulders in one fluid motion. The door slammed shut behind her with a force that made the walls tremble. She stood there, not with the aggression of a soldier or the suspicion of a foe, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had long since made peace with what they were. Drake stood, his instincts bracing for confrontation. He was no stranger to battle. His years in covert ops had taught him how to survive in any environment, against any threat. Yet there was something about this woman that unsettled him. She wasn't human, and the sharpness in her eyes hinted at a life far older and more dangerous than anything he could comprehend. "What are you?" he asked, his tone firm but edged with caution. There were many questions he wanted to ask, too many, but he would start with the one that mattered the most. For a long moment she didn't answer. Instead, she studied him, her gaze piercing, calculating. It was like she was weighing him, deciding if he was worth the effort. Finally she spoke, her words slow, deliberate. "I am what you fear," she said, her voice not cold but intense, layered with an undeniable force. "But I am also what you need." Drake's mind raced. His thoughts, usually razor-sharp and precise, now tangled in confusion. She had no reason to be here. No reason to seek him out. He had no reason to be in these mountains either. It was meant to be a break, an escape. Yet somehow, their paths had crossed, and it didn't feel like mere coincidence. Her eyes flickered to the fire, the glow reflecting off her mask-like biosuit. The suit wasn't just armor, it was part of her. Her body shifted beneath it, movements too fluid to be entirely human. But what was more disconcerting was the way her gaze softened, just for a moment, as she studied the fire. "I'm not here for you," she continued, her voice quieter now, almost vulnerable. "But I sense something. A bond unspoken but strong. You are connected to me, Drake Lawson, Whether you believe it or not, our fates are tied. His pulse quickened at the mention of his name, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife at his side. Who the hell are you? She moved closer, her eyes narrowing slightly as if considering how best to explain. The air between them felt charged, heavy with something Drake couldn't place. The alien woman lifted a hand, slowly removing her helmet, revealing a face that was too perfect, too symmetrical to belong to any race he knew. Her skin shimmered faintly, like the surface of water in sunlight, and her hair, long and dark, cascaded down her back. But it was her eyes, the strange, iridescent glow, that held him captive. They were ancient, full of secrets that hadn't yet been spoken. She held his gaze, her voice dropping to a whisper. I am Rael, a warrior from the Elysian clan. And you are mine! Drake's heart stopped, his breath hitching as he processed her words. The weight of the moment settled like a boulder, crushing the air from his lungs. I am mine, he thought to himself. But as she stepped closer, her presence wrapped around him like a tempest, he wasn't sure anymore. The wind had died down, leaving behind a biting silence that was almost worse than the storm itself. Inside the cabin, the fire flickered, casting soft, rhythmic shadows against the wooden beams of the ceiling. The faint crackle of burning logs was the only sound, but it did little to ease the tension that hung between them like a thick fog. Drake stood frozen, his mind racing. The woman, Rael, had just claimed something impossible. She said he was hers. He gritted his teeth, trying to suppress the flood of emotions threatening to break free. He was a man of logic, a man who had lived in the shadows, solving problems, making decisions based on reason. But now, with this alien warrior in his presence, none of it made sense. Rael's eyes, glowing with an ethereal light, followed him carefully. She hadn't moved from the spot where she'd removed her helmet, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched between them, taut with the unsaid. Finally she spoke, her voice low, yet carrying an undeniable weight. You are confused, she said, her words soft but laced with an underlying certainty. Understandable. But what I say is true. We are bound by fate, Drake. Drake forced himself to take a breath, willing the fire in his chest to cool. Bound by fate? He repeated, his voice cold and sharp. Is that what you call it? You invade my cabin, you come here with, what? This suit that looks like something out of a nightmare, and then you tell me we're tied together? This doesn't make sense. Her gaze softened, but only for a moment. The flicker of vulnerability in her eyes was quick, gone before he could pinpoint it. She tilted her head slightly, as if studying him for some hidden truth she couldn't quite decipher. It's not something you'll understand yet, she said, stepping closer, each movement deliberate and filled with power. Her biosuit hummed softly as she approached, her presence suddenly filling the room with a quiet force. But you will, Drake. In time you will understand. The bond we share, it's not just a connection of bodies but of purpose. Drake's hand clenched at his side. He was no stranger to women. He'd had his fair share of relationships, some fleeting, some more intense, but never anything like this. The idea that he was connected to an alien woman, bound by something beyond the physical, beyond reason, it was too much. He looked down at his hand, the one that had once gripped weapons with deadly precision. Now, it trembled just slightly. Not from fear, but from something else, something deeper. So what? You expect me to just believe you? He asked, his voice thick with disbelief. That we're fated to be together? That you and I have some grand purpose in this messed up universe? Rael was standing just a few feet away now, and she let the space between them remain. You don't have to believe it, Drake. But you will feel it. You'll see the signs, the marks of our fate. Her eyes met his, intense and unyielding. When the time comes, you'll know. But don't mistake my words. This is not about love. Not in the way you think. Her words sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't a threat. It was something colder. Something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Love? Was she even capable of such a thing? Or was she speaking of something else entirely? Before he could respond, Rael turned her attention to the room, her gaze sweeping across the small cabin as if searching for something. The storm outside had given way to a fragile stillness, but there was no peace in the air. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said, her voice growing softer, almost a whisper. "I didn't want this either. I have no choice." Drake watched her carefully, trying to read her. She was an enigma, a beautiful, deadly enigma. Her suit gleamed in the firelight, each movement fluid, as though she wasn't quite human, not entirely. But it was in her eyes, those hauntingly beautiful eyes, that he saw the real truth. This wasn't just about her mission, her assignment. It was about something deeper, something personal. Drake took a step closer. "If you're not here to hurt me, why don't you start telling me what this is all about? I'm not in the mood for cryptic riddles." Rael didn't flinch at his tone. Instead, she seemed to consider him for a moment. Then, with a deep breath, she spoke again, her words slower now, more deliberate. "Do you remember the stories of the Elysian clan, Drake? Legends of warriors who fought in wars of old? Of a people forged in the fires of battle, bound to the stars themselves?" Drake frowned. "I've heard whispers. Tales of some ancient race of warriors. But I thought they were just myths." Rael's lips curled slightly, a near imperceptible smile. "Legends often have a kernel of truth, don't they?" She took another step closer, and this time, her presence pressed against him like a living thing. "I am not a myth, Drake. And neither is the bond we share. It's been written into the very fabric of the universe." Drake's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle coming together in chaotic flashes. This wasn't just some chance encounter. This wasn't random. She was here for a reason. And he was tangled in it, whether he liked it or not. Rael's voice dropped even lower. "You will come to understand, but only when you're ready. Only when you accept what you are meant to be." Her final words echoed in the silence between them. "You are no longer just a man. You are part of something greater." A tremor of unease surged through him, mingling with something else. Curiosity. Desire. Before he could respond, Rael stepped back, her gaze turning cold, unreadable once again. "We have time, Drake. But not much." The tension crackled in the air, and as she turned toward the window, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything, his world, his purpose, was about to change. The sky had darkened into an inky black, only the stars piercing through, their cold light distant and indifferent. The storm had passed hours ago, but its presence lingered in the way the world felt, heavy, taut with tension. Outside, the mountain wind howled, rattling the cabin's windows like an uninvited guest. But inside, the air was thick with a different kind of pressure, one that neither the wind nor the storm could explain. Drake stared into the fire, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. His eyes followed the flickering shadows dancing on the walls, each one a reminder of how strange this night had become. The woman, the alien, was still there, and the closer she was to him, the more his pulse seemed to race, as if his body recognized something his mind couldn't comprehend. Rael had been silent for the past few minutes, seated across from him, her eyes fixed on him in a way that made him feel both observed and understood. The unsettling thing was, he didn't know what to make of it. Everything about her was different, her presence, her demeanor, her very essence, yet there was something about her that drew him in, a magnetic pull he couldn't ignore. "So what now?" Drake asked, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. He wasn't sure if he was addressing her or himself. The question hung in the air between them, pregnant with 1,000 unanswered inquiries. What did she want from him? Why had she come? And why did he feel so damned connected to her? Rael didn't immediately answer. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her hand moving with grace and purpose. Her fingers brushed the edge of the table, a gesture that seemed almost human, yet utterly foreign. It was the kind of thing that made him question the lines between them. Was she truly an alien, or had they both crossed into a different realm of reality? "No," she said softly, her voice like velvet over steel. "Now we figure out what this connection is. What you and I are meant to do. This isn't a chance encounter, Drake. This is fate. He shook his head, rubbing his temple as though he could will away the confusion. Fate? You keep saying that. But I don't see how it works. How can I be part of this thing you're talking about when I don't even know what the hell you are? Rael's gaze softened, and for a moment, her expression held a trace of something unfamiliar, vulnerability, perhaps. She let out a slow breath, as if gathering her thoughts. I am Rael of the Elysian clan, she said. We were once the guardians of our galaxy, protectors of ancient knowledge. But our people, we lost our way. We grew complacent. And now, the very fabric of our existence is at risk. The universe is shifting, Drake, and your people, humans, are key to the survival of everything. Drake blinked, processing the weight of her words. Wait, my people? You're saying humans are important to you? To whatever this is? His tone was incredulous, but the idea gnawed at him, tugging at the part of him that refused to believe in coincidence. Rael's eyes darkened, as though the gravity of the situation had finally settled over her. She leaned forward, placing her palms on the table, and her voice dropped, now urgent, insistent. It's not just about you, Drake. It's about us, our connection. Your DNA, it's the key to everything. Without you, without your blood, the chain of destiny will break, and the universe will fall into chaos. The balance will shift. And we will lose everything. Drake stood abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the wooden floor, his heart hammering in his chest. You're telling me that my blood is some kind of cosmic anchor? He spat, disbelief lacing his words. This is insane. I'm just a guy. Just some guy trying to live his life out here in the mountains. I'm not anything special. Rael's gaze followed him, unwavering, but there was no anger in her eyes, only understanding. You don't see it yet, but you will. This, she gestured between them, isn't just about destiny. It's about survival. The universe has aligned in a way that can't be undone. You are as much a part of this as I am. Drake paced the cabin, his thoughts spiraling in circles. Nothing made sense. Nothing about this night, this woman, this connection made sense. And yet, the more she spoke, the more the air seemed to hum with truth. As if his instincts, those primal, guttural feelings that had kept him alive in countless dangerous situations, were telling him to listen. His mind flashed back to the moment he'd first seen her, when Rael had stood before him in that cold, almost mythical armor. There had been something in her eyes then, something that had sparked a recognition deep within him. He couldn't place it, but he felt it now, something alive, something ancient, something real. Rael's voice cut through his thoughts again. You're afraid, she said quietly, almost like a statement of fact rather than a question. It's natural. But you don't have to be. You'll understand soon enough. Drake turned to her, meeting her gaze head-on, his chest tight with emotions he couldn't quite name. And what if I don't want to understand? What if I just want to go back to my life? I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for you. For the first time since she had entered his cabin, a flicker of something closer to sadness, flashed across Rael's face. She stood slowly, her movements deliberate, graceful. You don't have a choice, Drake, she said softly. Because we are not just a chapter in your life. We are the entire story. As she stepped closer, the temperature in the room seemed to drop, and Drake's heart thudded in his chest, a low, primal beat that echoed through his veins. Rael was standing inches from him now, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her body, the power that lay just beneath her skin. Your world is changing, she whispered, her lips barely grazing his ear. And when it does, I will be there. We'll be there. Together. Her words were a promise, a threat, and a possibility all at once. And for the first time, Drake didn't know if he was ready for what came next, or if he was already too late. The silence of the mountain cabin was deafening as Drake stood frozen, a wild tempest swirling inside him. The fire crackled in the hearth, but it did little to warm him, the chill in his bones deepened by Rael's words. Together. Forever. What the hell does that mean? His thoughts collided with each other, each one a jumbled mess of fear, disbelief, and something darker, something that clawed at the back of his mind, urging him to accept what Rael was telling him. Outside, the wind howled like an animal in pain, the world beyond the cabin locked in a bitter cold that mirrored his growing unease. But inside, the air was thick, heavy with the unspoken words that hung between him and the woman who had turned his life upside down. He stared at her, standing just a hair's breadth away, her face so close to his that he could feel the heat radiating off her. The tension between them was tangible, like an electric current. It made his pulse race, the hairs on the back of his neck standing at attention. Everything in his body screamed for him to retreat, to push her away, but he couldn't. He didn't want to. Drake took a slow, shaky breath, trying to force some clarity into the storm of emotions that raged inside him. He stepped back, but Rael's gaze followed him, unrelenting. There was no fear in her eyes, only something far more unnerving, determination. "Look, I don't know what this is," Drake muttered, rubbing the back of his neck as he glanced around the cabin, his thoughts whirling. "You keep talking about fate, destiny, but I don't see how I fit into this." His voice faltered slightly, betraying the uncertainty gnawing at him. "I'm just a guy. I'm not some hero. I don't have some cosmic destiny like you think." Rael's eyes darkened, and she took a step toward him, her voice low but firm. "You have no idea who you are, do you?" Her tone was soft, but there was a steel edge to it that made his breath catch in his throat. "You are more than just a guy. You are the key to everything. Without you, there will be no future. No hope. You think this is a burden, but it's a gift. Your gift." The word stung, and Drake's throat tightened. He shook his head, stepping back again, but this time he didn't get far. The wall behind him was too close. His chest tightened as a sharp, bitter laugh escaped him. "A gift?" he scoffed. "You call this a gift? Being dragged into some alien power struggle I don't even understand? That's not a gift, Rael. That's a damn curse." For a moment, Rael said nothing. The silence stretched long and heavy between them, suffocating. Then, slowly, she reached out, her hand coming to rest lightly on his arm. Her touch was surprisingly warm, like fire wrapped in silk, and it sent an unexpected shiver through him. She looked up at him with those piercing, ancient eyes, as though she could see into his very soul. "Do you want to know why you feel like this?" she asked quietly, her voice a whisper that seemed to vibrate in the air. "Why everything about this feels wrong? It's because you are waking up. Your power, your potential, it's been dormant for far too long." Drake blinked, his breath catching as she slowly pulled her hand away. He could still feel the lingering warmth of her touch, like an imprint on his skin. His mind was spinning, and yet something in her words struck a chord deep within him, something he couldn't ignore. "Power?" he repeated, his voice almost a growl. "I'm not powerful. I'm just a guy trying to survive. I don't want any of this." Rael's eyes softened, the intensity in them shifting to something deeper, almost compassionate. She studied him for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. "You want to survive, Drake?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Then you need to understand something. This isn't just about you. This is about us. This connection between you and me, it's older than the stars themselves. We were meant to find each other." Drake stepped away, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. "I don't know what the hell you're talking about," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "I just want to be left alone." But Rael didn't move. Her presence seemed to fill the room, suffocating him. "You can't run from this," she said, her voice steady and calm. "This is bigger than both of us. You are part of something much greater, Drake. Whether you want to be or not." He shook his head again, the bitterness in his chest rising like bile. "You don't get it. I don't want to be part of whatever game this is. I didn't ask for you, or any of this." Rael took a step toward him, but this time, her approach was slower, measured. "You can't deny what's inside of you," she said, her voice soft but piercing. "It's there. It's always been there. It's why you can't walk away from me. From this. Drake's heart pounded in his chest as her words cut through him. He felt it too, the pull, the bond that tied them together in ways he couldn't understand. It was undeniable, like a magnet drawing him to her despite every instinct telling him to run. You think I don't want to walk away? He shot back, his voice a rasp. Every part of me is screaming to get away from this. From you? But I can't. I know that. And that terrifies me more than anything. Rael's eyes glinted with something dangerous. Good. Because what comes next will require more than just your body. It will require your soul. Drake froze. What does that mean? Before she could answer, the ground beneath them rumbled, a deep, low sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. The cabin shook, and a shudder ran through him, the vibrations rattling his teeth. His heart skipped a beat. And then, Rael's eyes flickered toward the door. They're here, she whispered, her voice a cold, sharp warning.